Real estate photography essentials range from simple to complex. I mean, when it comes to photography, when it's not either simple or complex. But that's besides the point. What we're talking about today is real estate photography essentials for beginners. Let's get into it. If you're someone that likes geometrical shapes, framing out a shot to highlight and emphasize the size, shape, angle, and details of a person, place, or thing in a geometrical space, then this video is for you. Photography is a broad field, which means you have a variety of avenues to explore. You can go the fast photography route and shoot weddings, sports, parties, events, graduations, portraits, street, investigative, etc. And you can go at a more even pace photography and shoot real estate, architecture, nature and wildlife, astral, portrait, street, product, commercial, automotive, etc. There are no limits to how creative you can be when it comes to photography and the professional field in which you can enter as a photographer. Although I am tailoring this video to real estate photographers, all of these skills can be applied to any field of photography. I'll go into further details of different aspects of real estate photography in later videos, covering topics such as tripods, cameras, flashes, filters, when it comes to gear, and more technical topics such as composing a shot, leading lines, HDR photography, and editing. Now, let's get into what we're talking about in this video, which is real estate photography essentials for beginner photographers. Let's start out with gear. And the first piece of gear on the list is the camera. Sensor size when starting out is very subjective. If budget is a main factor, then I would say start out with a crop sensor entry-level camera or a used full frame DSLR. You may be able to find a full frame used mirrorless somewhere out there for a decent price, but if you want to start out with something new, I would say go with the crop sensor entry level camera that can shoot bracketed photos. I'm saying start out with a camera that can shoot bracketed photos because if budget really is a factor, then it's really going to cut into getting a flash, because a flash is something you may need if you don't want to shoot bracketed photos. But I would still get something that can shoot bracketed photos just in case. And I do want to add, there are some cheap full frame DSLR cameras out there that will, honestly blow any entry level mirrorless camera out of the water. When I started out in real estate photography, I started with the Canon SL2, which is the DSLR version of the Canon M50, which is my first camera recommendation on my recommendation list. But let's now get into camera recommendations. Now, before I go further into this list, I do want to say I'm just listing off the cameras, not really going into the camera specs, and that is for every other gear recommendation on this list. If you're interested in Sony, I would say go with the A6400. If you want to go towards Canon, I would say go for the Canon M50. Now, Panasonic, if you want to go with Panasonic, I would say go with the G85 or the GX85. For Olympus, I would say the EM10 Mark III or the EM10 Mark IV. With Nikon, you can go with the Z50 or the ZFC. And Fujifilm, you can go with the XT100, XT200, XE. Do further research on the different cameras because there's a ton out there. And I do have to mention that there are some used full frame mirrorless and used full frame DSLR that may come in at the same price or lower than of the cameras that I mentioned. You don't have to buy the camera new. You can always go the used option. And for a first camera, I would definitely say go used. Unless you want that new experience of unboxing your own camera, used is definitely an option. But let's get into lenses. For crop sensor lenses, and this is ranging from the Micro Four Thirds to the APS-C lenses, you can go with something like the 7 to 14, 8 to 16, 10 to 18, 10 to 28. It really just depends on the camera you're using and the camera manufacturer. If you go the full frame route, you want something like the 14 to 35, 15 to 35, 16 to 35, 17 to 28. All those lenses will cover the range that you need for real estate photography, which also depends on the camera company you are using. And I also think it's fair to mention that the Canon, the RP, I believe, is pretty inexpensive for a full frame mirrorless camera. Now back to lenses. Starting out, you want to go with the f4 glass, or because they are cheaper than the lenses that are the 2.8. Those lenses will cost you much more. And in real estate, you're gonna keep your lens at f8 to f11 99.9% of the time. And it'll save you some money in the long run. So when you do get the chance to invest in a higher end camera or invest in another lens, then you have that extra money that you didn't spend on that 2.8. Because let's face it, when in photography, all the new cameras and the new lenses that come out every 3 to 6 months, you're definitely going to want to grab something new, and having that extra money is what's going to allow you to do that. And with that, here are a few lens recommendations specifically for crop sensor lenses. You have the Sony E10 to 18. You also have the Canon 10 to 18. And I believe both of these lenses, the Sony and the Canon, are both f4. For Panasonic and Olympus, you have the Panasonic 7 to 14 f4. You can go with the Olympus 7 to 14 f4, but I believe it costs about $500 more than the Panasonic, but they're both options. And last but not least, with the Nikon, you can go with the Nikon 10 to 14, I believe that's what it is. The Nikon 10 to 14 millimeter, it's a variable aperture lens. It's not Nikon's, I guess you would say, mirrorless lens. It's one of Nikon's DSLR lenses. You will need the FZ2 adapter to pair with the mirrorless crop sensor camera in order to use the Nikon 10 to 24 because it's a DSLR lens. And with these lenses, you'll want to consider filters. You will want a ND filter, which is a neutral density filter, something that ranges from like a 2 to 5 stop. You'll need it to help cut down some of the light when you're out shooting on sunny days. And you may want a polarizing filter as well, a circular polarizing filter. When starting out, they are optional. I would say hold off on these for a later time, especially when starting out, because you do want to learn how the camera and the lens works without an extra element in front of the lens. And then at a later time, when you invest in them, you can then learn how the polarizing filter and the ND filter affects the image. I guess a simpler way to put that is, let's learn how to crawl before we walk. We don't need everything in the beginning. We just need the essentials, and then move on to all of the other components and see how they add to the experience of creating photography. You will also want something to stabilize your camera, especially when you're shooting bracketed photography. So let's talk about tripods. When starting out, you want a tripod that has some weight to it, a sturdy, heavy tripod. You want a ball head tripod that has some weight. Something like the Vanguard Alta Pro 263 AB100 aluminum tripod with the SBH 100 ball head, or something comparable to it like the Manfrotto B-Free Advanced Camera Tripod. You may also want a flash. And I say you may want it because you don't really need it if you are starting out with bracketed photography, but I have been in some dark situations where even when shooting with bracketed photography, a flash came in handy. And if you are interested in starting out with flash, here are a couple of flash recommendations. You can go with the Neewer NW645C TTL Slave GN58 camera flash speed light, and you can go with the Yongnuo 564. You also want a light dome. In the beginning, your photography may not be that great and your camera gear may not be top tier, but at least you starting out with the essentials, learning how to use the gear, learning as you go, also picking up some of the technical skills, and in the end, once you grow and get some experience and can invest in higher end gear and really know how to use it when you're out on a shoot, I mean, what can beat that? And if you're looking for a good starter camera, you can watch whatever pops up on the screen right here. And that's my gear recommendations. And that is it for today. Thanks for subscribing. Stay awesome.